Hello, both of my previous videos talked primarily about Overwatch's ranked systems, and I saw a lot of comments about wanting the system to take your personal performance into account when adjusting your rank, so I figured it could make an entertaining issue to discuss all of the problems with implementing a system like this. Now, if you don't know how Blizzard adjusts your rank, they had said before in an interview somewhere about Overwatch 2 that your wins and losses are the only things that impact your rank when it gets adjusted. So your own performance in a match does not have any impact on the amount of rank that you gain or lose for that match when you get your rank update. It is only based on whether you win or lose, and adjusted based on the ranks of other players in the lobby. So for example, if you're in a lobby with a higher average rank than your own, you will gain more and lose less rank. And if you're in a lobby with a lower average rank than your own, then you will gain less and lose more rank accordingly. Now, before we get any further, I'd like to show you something. Wow, look at that. Isn't it so cool? You know what you need to do. Trust me, I'll make it worth your time. Now, the first thing I think it's important to mention is that taking performance into account when adjusting ranked is a double-edged sword. Many people only think about it whenever they have a game they performed really well in, but still lost anyways. They would want to be punished less for that loss because they feel like they were doing really well and that they should have won, but they just didn't. But you need to realize that adding this to the ranked system also means that in games where you aren't performing well, you're going to lose more rank for losses and gain less for wins. It has the potential to both harm you as well as help you. And when talking about a system like this, many people just remember the close games that they did well in and still lost, rather than all the times where they didn't perform well and won, or they just got completely stomped. The immediate issue you run into when trying to add performance-based rank adjustments into Overwatch is simply how the heck do you even quantify what a good or a bad performance is. Comparing this to Valorant, as Valorant does have a ranked system that, while it is primarily based on wins and losses, it does also factor in how well you performed when adjusting your rank after each match. In Valorant, they mainly use kills, deaths, and assists, as every agent has a similar health and all have access to the same weaponry from the SOP. So while most agents have unique abilities that help them specialize in particular fields such as gathering info, defending locations, or engaging and initiating fights, their weaponry makes them all very capable of picking up the same amount of kills over the course of a match. Overwatch is a very different beast. It has different roles that hard specialized into different functions within the team, being tank heroes with damage mitigation abilities and a health bar 3 times the size of the average damage and support hero, damage heroes who have abilities that either help them secure kills or move around the map more quickly, and support heroes who specialize in healing allies while having abilities that primarily assist allies, both preventing them from dying as well as helping them secure kills on enemies. Even within each role, each hero has a completely different weapon more suited towards a different task. Snipers like Widow, Hanzo, and Ashe focus on long-range picks with high elimination potential against non-tank targets, having high damage per shot but a very low fire rate. Spam heroes like Junkrat have high damage spam weapons that are hard to hit but deal massive damage and are capable of locking down areas and impeding enemy progress. Flankers like Genji, Tracer, and Sombra focus on mobility, getting in and securing kills before disengaging, focusing more on securing individual kills rather than overall damage. Then we have the mid-range type of hero like Soldier and Cassidy, who focus on decent consistent damage output at a medium range. While there are a lot more categories and even subcategories with heroes such as Symmetra and Torbjorn, who focus more on team utility and support similar to support heroes, but without the healing aspect that the support role heroes offer. It would take a while to go through all of the roles, but you should get the idea that different heroes have different weapons and abilities that would result in them having very different expected stats from each other, even if they were to be played at the exact same skill level performance-wise. So for a system like this to work, you would just need to compare stats only to stats of the same hero to get an accurate performance rating, right? Well, not really, as trying to take this route in Overwatch presents another problem. Actually, it's more like another 3 problems. But the first one we'll talk about is hero swapping. Unlike Valorant, where you are locked into an agent once you select one at the start of the game, Overwatch is built around hero swapping, where at any point during the match, you can head back to spawn and freely switch to a different character within your role. You could try to quantify performance for different heroes by comparing the stats gained as that hero to the amount of time that hero is played, but the issue with trying that in Overwatch is that what happens in 1 minute of a match could be very different than what happens in another minute of the match. Comparing again to Valorant's system, they can get away with using stats because a match of Valorant is built upon rounds. Each round, teams will be respawned and reset to their respective sides, so you could easily just divide the performance of the players by the rounds played, or even just measure performance on a per-round basis. This would create a pretty fair and accurate metric of player performance for that match. However, Overwatch does not have rounds in the same way that Valorant does. Instead, in Overwatch, players are constantly respawning and fights could take any amount of time. You could have very slow fights where teams poke and look for picks for a while before engaging. Or you could have very fast fights where both teams just say, "Fuck it, we ball," as both of the Lucios amp speed and they run into each other and just go ham in the mosh pit, resulting in a fight that will only take around 15 seconds before a winner is decided. In addition, there's just many other specific scenarios that can cause a problem with measuring your performance over the course of a game. For example, say you're playing support. You just died and it's the last team fight, so you swap the Lucio to try and speed back to the point and stall it out so that your team can maybe touch and win the fight through ultimates or some other miracle. Most players would consider this to be the optimal play to make in this situation, as it gives your team a chance, albeit a very small one, to get back in the game where they would otherwise have just lost. However, if you are measuring performance using hero stats, doing this will absolutely tank your overall performance, as the game will look at the 45 seconds you played Lucio and got 0 healing and maybe only 100 damage as you try desperately to stall point, and just say, "Man, this dude sucks. 0 healing as Lucio LMAO." It's also not super uncommon to make swaps if something just isn't working on your team, but doing so will just leave you with some of the worst stats possible on that particular hero for the time that you did play them and it didn't work, punishing you even though you're trying to make swaps to help your team win by swapping to something that will better help your team deal with what the enemy team is running. Going back to the issues with trying to use stats to measure performance, another problem is that the expected stats each hero should have isn't even just dependent on what hero you're playing and how good you are playing them, but also what heroes your allies and the enemy team are playing. And the biggest culprit for this problem is Mercy. Damage boost will just straight up make one of your damage heroes deal more damage. It's literally the name of the ability. Running a hero with a Mercy pocket will massively inflate their stats, and if you use stats as a mean to measure performance, then having a Mercy pocket just becomes a cheat code to climbing up fast. Not only that, but it also becomes unfair towards players without a Mercy pocket, as now their stats for performance are being compared to an average that's being boosted up by players playing with a Mercy pocket. This same problem also extends to a lot of other hero picks. Playing against snipers who play very long distances, or against flankers who are quick to disengage from fights, you will have less eliminations than if you were playing against other heroes that have to stay in the fight and can't simply play super long distances, as snipers play from such long range that it can be very hard to take a fight against them, and flankers can use their mobility to easily disengage from a fight that they may be losing. This problem also extends to enemy tank picks as well. Roadhog is a massive damage sponge who tanks by just taking damage and having a self-heal ability. If you're a Soldier 76 playing against a Roadhog, you will be farming a lot more damage than if you were playing against a hero like Reinhardt, who has a 1400 health barrier that you have to get through before you start damaging him. The same things extend to supports as well. If you have a Reinhardt that keeps brawling, you'll have a lot more healing than if you were playing the same hero with a Wrecking Ball, who will primarily use health kits using his high mobility. If you have 2 supports on your team that have high healing output, like an Ana and a Baptiste, then they'll be competing against each other for heals, leading to both of them having lower than usual heals than they would have if you were running something different, like an Ana Lucio comp. To make this work reasonably well, you would want to have a different set of stats for performance for each different hero composition that each team could run against each other, and this just straight up wouldn't work. since with 10 people in each lobby, the number of unique team versus team compositions would be 63,919,974,976, with this insane number being every single possible team composition in the game being put against every single other team composition in the game, and different team comps doesn't even account for stats being different against teams that are running the same comps, but with completely different playstyles. Playing against a team that will fall back and regroup if someone gets picked off before a fight will result in much lower stats than playing against a team that will still commit to the fight on the objective to stall out progress and maybe get some ultimates out of the other team. Both of these plays can be just as good, but one will result in vastly more damage and eliminations for each team than the other play would. So as a TLDR for everything I said prior, the only real way to measure performance would be looking at a player's stats, as I believe this is what most players think of when they are referring to their own performance in a game. The problem with this is that there are so many factors outside of your own personal skill that influence what your stats will look like. Your teammates' hero choices, the enemy team's hero choices, the playstyles of both of the teams. All of these will end up having a massive impact on what your stats will look like for that match. So when it comes down to it, there's not really any good ways of measuring performance for a given match to adjust your rank gains and losses with. So to wrap this up, we already talked a lot about why performance would be really hard to measure in a match of Overwatch. So let's talk about what the game would look like if a system like this were to be implemented anyways. Firstly, Moira instantly becomes hard meta, as C is designed around having the most potential to pad out her healing and damage stats. But this alone should probably already put the fear of God in you, as the next best support to pad out stats would be Brig. For damage, spam heroes like Junk and Pharah, Bastion will probably reign supreme, and for tanks it would probably be Sigma. Even if you did compare stats on a per hero basis, like with your Ana stats only being compared to the stats of other people playing Ana, the game would still just become much more greed focused, with players trying more to just pad out their stats as much as possible, rather than trying to work together with their team to win. Since with high stats being good performance, then just trying to pad your stats out as much as possible by turbo-inting and making suboptimal plays becomes a low-risk, high-reward endeavor, since if you do win, then you gain much more rank than you would have, and if you do end up losing, then you lose less rank. Instead of playing damage characters in a smart way, like holding high ground to defend the objective and making it harder for the enemy team to make progress, it would be much more beneficial for you to just drop down and run it down main, trying to farm as much damage and eliminations as possible. Even though this playstyle does make your team much more likely to lose the game in the long run. Okay, now I lied. This is actually the final thing to cover, which is that stats honestly don't mean much at all in Overwatch. As we talked about, it's very easy to inflate and manipulate them if that's your goal. Do you want more damage? Just ignore the enemy's damage characters and supports and just mindlessly pump damage into the enemy tank as they get double pocketed. You're not securing kills or taking duels to help your team, but you are inflating your damage stat as much as possible so that you can say, look, I have big number, I'm doing so much, while the enemy team's damage heroes are uncontested in taking out your backline. There are so many games of Overwatch I've seen where the team with the worst stats will actually win. Take this game for example that I had literally played earlier today. The enemy team has a far higher average damage than my team, and their damage and tank each almost have 10 more limbs over my own team's damage and tank. Yet my team still won at the end, due to just how the fights had played out over the course of the game. Now you may look at this and think, well yeah, your Baptiste is cracked and carried your ass, just look at his stats. And while you are right, this does actually tie back to what we talked about earlier with hero swapping, because the secret here is that he had only played BAP for the last 2 minutes of this game during our second defense to help against the Far Mercy. Before that, he'd actually played Moira for almost the entire game. And while stats like that may look insane on a Baptiste, there are much more expected stats from a Moira, as Moira's whole thing is that she has very high damage and high healing output, but no utility for her team. Now I feel like this is a good place to leave this video off. While I don't think it's impossible to make a fair system that takes performance into account in Overwatch, it's definitely much harder to put together than you may initially think. If you'd be interested in more videos like this, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you have any Overwatch related topics you may want me to cover. This video itself was a topic I mainly looked into due to my last two videos being focused around the ranking system, and I saw a lot of comments about including performance and rank gain. So I thought it would be a fun topic to go over a lot of the difficulties in doing so. So until next time, see ya.